Hello, I'm back, and today we're going to talk about books I read in October. So let's get into it, and there's more than this. Starting off with The Islands by Natasha Preston. This is an author that I have been reading since 2012 when she was on Wattpad, and now I just feel the need to keep going for some reason. This one was 3 out of 5 stars for me. This book shocked me. The amount of improvement in Natasha's writing between the previous book and this one is astonishing. Seriously, I was so impressed, very proud, and glad I've stuck with them despite all of my better judgments. The Island follows a group of teen influencers who've been invited to a private island theme park for a weekend to help promote it before it opens. It's a very rich people exclusive kind of experience, and these kids are taking every advantage they can until one of them goes missing and later shows up dead. Now, the other 5 teens, the owner, and the resort staff have to figure out who the murderer is among them and find a way off the island. Like all Natasha Preston novels, this was an easy read that kept me invested in needing to know how it would play out, but this one was different. This time it kept me guessing, constantly changing my thoughts. The parts that are usually so easy to predict were a lot more challenging this time around. A character I was highly suspicious of was nothing, and the character I suspected the least was involved. While the story itself had improved and was less predictable, the writing was also significantly better in this book than in any of her previous books. Recurring common mistakes, misuse of words, and plot mistakes are all issues I usually find when reading this author's books, but this was free of them, aside from the odd typo that's standard for any book. Next up is Superstitious by R.L. Stine. This was a DNF for me. I never thought it would come to this, but I've DNF'd an R.L. Stine book. R.L. Stine is mostly known for his children's books and sometimes teen books, but he put out a few adult novels too. From what I've read of this, I can understand why he hasn't published many. I could tell from the first page that this book wouldn't go well, but I tried to push through. I hoped it would get better, but it just wasn't happening. If anything, it was getting worse. This book follows a few different characters, but it swaps point of view without any notice or recognition. It looks like there are 3 or 4 different groups of people we follow, with occasional half-chapter spurts in an additional point of view, which is a lot to remember, follow, and keep track of. And it can be done well, but there were too many overlapping issues. There are paragraphs at times where it feels as though he had a thought, picked 7 different ways to say it, and just blurted them out onto the page. It gives, I'll come back to this later and make it coherent, but then never coming back. It gives draft paragraph because I haven't figured out how I want to say this. And it happens quite a lot. It also feels like nothing is happening. Sure, someone got murdered, ripped apart, twisted, and all sorts, and that was exciting for the single page when it happened, but that's the only time this book was interesting at all for the first 60 pages. On top of this, the characters' conversations, which seem to be taking up a rather large part of the book, are incredibly boring and irrelevant. They will spend a couple of pages discussing absolute rubbish that's got nothing to do with anything. It's boring, it's hard to follow, but most of all, why should we care? Goosebumps, You Can't Scare Me. This is 1 out of 5 stars. This is one of the most boring Goosebumps books I have ever read. Nothing happens. A group of kids do the same thing over and over again and nothing happens. The last few pages, mildly interesting, but aside from that, nothing happens, and it's so boring. Goosebumps, One Day at Horrorland. This is 5 out of 5 stars. I'm guessing I read this one quite a few times as a kid because I knew exactly what was going to happen and when. This was probably one of my favorite Goosebumps books. It keeps you on your toes, it keeps you curious, and oh my goodness, the plot twists. Perfect, top tier Goosebumps. Before I let go, this was 4 out of 5 stars. I think this is one of those books that I know I had feelings about, but they're not feelings that can really be explained. It was dark, devastating and ominous. It was blunt. Nothing was held back or brushed over. It left me with mixed feelings and questions while also feeling satisfying and complete. And I can't explain it. I do think it's important to acknowledge what this book does, though, because this is a book following two best friends. One of them is dead in the present day, but there are flashback chapters and letters that show us more of her. I think the way Kira's bipolar is shown and the way those around her react to it is important because it shows both extremes. It shows how people around her treated her differently when she was first diagnosed, how they were cautious and distant, to how they suddenly loved her when they decided she was useful. The two extremes of rejection and support, and how they can both be toxic and harmful. It also shows how she felt about it, how it affected her, and the ways it affected her life. Throughout the book, we get to see what her episodes were like and what she was like during them. All of this is shown through a combination of present-day chapters, flashback chapters, and letters Kira wrote to Corey. The House for Lost Things, 5 out of 5 stars. This is the third book in the Bloke Who Steals Houses trilogy, which, if you don't know, is my favorite book and you should go read it. It's over. It ended. No thoughts, only screaming. I really wish I could give a coherent explanation of this series and what I love about it, but I fear it is impossible. As much as I love this series and would read it forever if I could, I do truly believe this book had the perfect ending and was a brilliant conclusion to the series. It wrapped everything up so well, and it gave us and them hope. Honestly, I was so scared to read the ending, but I keep thinking about it even now, several months later from when I was supposed to be filming this video, and it's one of the most satisfying endings to a story or series I've ever seen. Goosebumps, Why I'm Afraid of Bees. This is 2 out of 5 stars. Please, why was this so bad? It had a kind of interesting idea, but the execution was just boring and weird. Not good weird, just weird. Again, low tier Goosebumps. Cutting Your Teeth. This was 4 out of 5 stars. This book had the perfect combination of creepy creatures, vampires, werewolves, queers being oblivious, two men both crushing hard, both very convinced the other doesn't like him like that, and family trauma. Mob families, twins with a connection, no one leaves alive level bad guys, an ancient family curse that creeps into your nightmares and messes with your head. None of these aspects are lacking, and none are taking more space than they need. It's just enough to keep you interested and wanting to know more. Tokyo Ghoul. All 14 of them. This series was 3 out of 5 stars to me. I expected them to be really good, but honestly was a little disappointed. I think if not for all the issues that made it difficult to read, it would have been great. This series had a really interesting idea, fun characters, and, of course, trauma. But there were a lot of things that made it hard to read, and that made it hard to enjoy. At times, it feels like it's just being dragged out. There are chunks of information that are repeated, drawn out information that feels unnecessary to a point where it feels like I'm reading a textbook or Wikipedia page just shoved in the middle of a chapter. There are skip pages, which I guess are supposed to be for fun, but they're just shoved into the middle of the book, often not in the right place of the timeline, and they serve little to no purpose. Then there's the speech. We have speech bubbles that aren't pointed or aligned, making it unclear who is talking during a conversation. Sometimes there will be a single bubble on one page that looks like it's still the same conversation, but then on the next page you realize, nope, that's an entirely different scene, and they just shoved it into the middle of the previous scene. The background text will sometimes appear so that half is on one page and the rest of the phrase doesn't show up for 3 pages. So you go through all the conversations still taking place and then have to flick back to see how this phrase started because you've finally found the end of it. There was also a whole heap of stuff left open at the end and hinted at a subplot throughout the series but never actually went into that. So I'm guessing that's what Re is about, but who knows at this point. I still somewhat enjoyed reading this series, but there is a lot that felt unnecessary, quite a bit that wasn't wrapped up or concluded at all, and a fair bit that just isn't well structured. On a positive note, Juzo alone makes the entire thing very worth it. I adore that chaotic little shit with my entire being. Goosebumps Monster Blood 2. This was 2 out of 5 stars. Honestly, a little disappointed in this one. The return of Monster Blood is a pretty horrifying thought, and it definitely has potential. But most of this book is just a kid complaining about the class hamster and running into trouble with the school bully. Only the last third of the book has anything really happening, and it builds up and deflates, if you know, you know, in the space of 30 pages max. It starts and is over almost immediately.